Terces, welcome to the Creating Meaningful Work podcast. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you, Joanna. I love having conversations with you. So thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
I love having conversations with you too. So it's so good to be here and be able to have a conversation with you. I'd love to start off, for those who are not familiar with you and who you are and a little bit about your story and the work that you do. Give us an introduction to who Terces is.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I'm a mom and a grandmother. So we just had our 14th grandbaby. So I'm kind of uniquely aware of my role as grandmother. I'm a farmer. I milk cows. I make cheese. I live on 21 acres. I'm a hostess. Bila Farm for about 3 years, a little over 3 years, has been a destination place for retreats, like with Yellow, and then farm stays for families. Workshops, retreats. And I'm one of the co-founders. My husband and I are the founders of plant-based restaurants, Cafe Gratitude, Gracias, Madre. And then I'm also, a woman who went through sexual abuse as a teenager. I was a competitive athlete and then lived with an eating disorder for 20 years and have just recently written a book. So I'm an author that's about my journey, called Unreasonably Grateful. And I'm a podcast host that I got started doing when we did one together. So yeah, I kind of have my finger in lots of different pots, but mostly I would say, yeah, I'm someone who's committed. I would say my life mission is making sure people don't miss how loved they are.
And that comes through in everything that you do, whether it's a space that you've created or a restaurant or a retreat setting or a meal. It just, that love comes through, and it comes through in your book. I'd love to hear a little bit about your book, because it talks about your story. And you've written a few things before, but I know from knowing you that this book really seems to be something that came to the surface for you and felt like it needed to come out of you. Can you talk a little bit about what made you decide to write this book in particular, and a little bit about what that process has been like for you?
Sure. So I think, since early recovery, so I dealt with an eating disorder, anorexia and bulimia, from 16 years old to 36 years old. And this year is my 36th year of recovery.
Wow,
so
congrats.
I think through that journey of recovery, I've always known, I've worked with individuals, I've coached people, I've sponsored people. I've always known that I would share my story, because I think, just as I say in the book, once you get free, you want to support other people being freed. And, eating disorders are a really difficult trap. It's a difficult addiction to heal from, because food's not illegal. You don't have to be a criminal to get it. Food is so deeply attached to celebrations in our life. And so it's challenging. And, I wish that people no longer suffered from that, but I'm acutely aware that it hasn't even diminished since I went through that process. In fact, maybe it's even worse with social media. And then, COVID's impacted people, especially young people who were out of school. So anyway, I always known I would share my story, and I've been writing it for years. And then recently, in the last year, I kind of got this inspiration for a title for a book called Aged Beautifully. And I was trying to merge the writing I'd been doing with the writing that was happening currently. And that's when I realized, oh, I already have a book and I need to finish that one and get it out there so that this next one can kind of come through. And of course, I was with you and Elise in like a writer's little, cohort to support one another. And once I realized that the book was already done and I needed to just get it into chapters, get it edited, get it published, and get it out there, then that happened fairly quickly. I mean, it's a process, but fairly quickly. And it seems like perfect timing because we're now leaving Beulah Farm, where we've been for 16 plus years, and we're moving to new farmland in Idaho. And it feels like all these completions are happening as we leave and start this next chapter or new mission, whatever it might be. We're not even really sure. And so I think that facilitated me completing the book and getting it out there. And it does feel, really complete for me, that whole phase of my life. So now it does feel as if I can go ahead and share more from the present as opposed from the past, which a lot of that is my journey through addiction, spiritual healing, physically healing, emotional, mental healing, and kind of bringing me up to where I am today.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about what that was like when because for those listening, so me and Tercy and another friend of ours, Elise, we met and helped each other kind of work through our writing process. And I remember when you came in and you were like, I'm going to write this book aged beautifully, and there's going to be some recipes in there. And you kind of had this vision for it. And then you felt like this other book was coming to the surface for you. And you felt like this one needed to come out first. And one thing that I've always really admired about you is your ability to really connect with this deeper inner knowing, and not only just listen to it, but you hear from it and you follow it. I think some of us can sometimes hear it and then kind of ignore it, or, push it to the side, or get confused over, is this meant to be, or is this just this idea that I have? And we overthink it, and then we get tired, and then we're like, done. But you are someone who just seems to be able to hear from it and go, okay, this is it. And then you move in the other direction. Can you talk a little bit about, especially with this book writing process, how did you know, what came up for you? What was the process like to be like, oh, this isn't the one that I'm supposed to be doing right now. It's actually this.
Yes. Well, okay. So backtrack a little bit. How I recovered was by hearing that internal wisdom, which for me, I identify as Jesus, but hearing that internal wisdom and then following it. So that's how I recovered. And I was given, 4 succinct steps that led to me recovering after 20 years of probably, 19 of those believing that the next day I would be able to get out of the grips of the throes of this, which I didn't even have a name for at that time, but this compulsion. And then the next day, the next, whatever, So I think I have a deeply vested relationship with that wisdom that has me know how I stay in tune with that wisdom is to follow it, to do what I'm guided to do. Even though I still might question it, I just know at some deep level that it's wiser than I, and that I still am probably negotiating moves or quantifying or qualifying them, where the wisdom seems to have something that I don't really have access to without it, even though it sometimes makes no sense. So even, for example, this move to Idaho, we never thought we'd leave Beulah Farm. I thought I'd die here. I'd picked where I wanted to be buried here. And then that same wisdom kind of guided me and said, listen, your mission's done here. You've done a great job. You've built community. You've healed the land. You got a new mission. And I was like, oh, okay. And literally from just that insight, we shifted our whole future and started looking for the next stewards to take on Beulah Farm and go beyond where we've gone, and began this move to Idaho, which is nuts. It's nuts. We're starting all over again. And I'm in my 70s. and we have to build a home and heal a land and do the same thing. So, but I know at some deep level that the wisdom of that internal guidance, whatever you might call that, the divine feminine, God, whatever, what that deep wisdom, once you hear it, how we stay or how I stay in touch with it is I obey. I follow that guidance. And then I'm always given the next step. Cafe Gratitude was that. Cafe Gratitude was guided the same way. We had no interest in opening restaurants or inventing a board game, or that was like so bizarre to us. But time has proven that listening to that and following it is a life that we actually are designed for. It's the life we want, even though it's easy to get caught in the internal chatter of, I don't want to, this is crazy, we can't afford it, this is too hard, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think I've just listened often enough now that I know that is the pathway that I want to follow, even though I may not know how or why at the moment that I get the guidance. So I just don't argue with it anymore. I used to argue with it, but I just don't argue. And certainly, Joanna, I think because my recovery came from that, there's this deep kind of cellular knowledge that it's wiser than my best laid plans.
Because you've experienced that and you have that trust built up with it. Was there a moment that was kind of your first time interacting with this knowing that kind of started you on the journey of really trusting it? Because I think that trust is so huge. I think sometimes we hear it, but then we're like, well, if I do that, what's going to happen? And maybe everything is going to fall apart, or, all these things that I've built are like, this would just look crazy, or afraid of what people would think of me, the overthinking, the spiraling. And so I think what I hear from you is that you've really built up this trust because it's led you into this beautiful direction of recovery and being able to express who you are and live into your fullness and be living so vibrantly. So was there a moment when you first started to build that trust, or that you remember that was kind of like, oh, this is something I can listen to, and this is something that I can trust?
I think when I look back, I can see that there were, smaller experiences of it when I was younger and even as a child. And most of us have those, how something simple like, oh, don't put your keys there. And then you do anyway. And then later you can't find your keys, something as simple as
yes,
that.
I do that. Yes.
But for me, it was recovery. I can remember the moment specifically when I'd been struggling for 20 years with this eating disorder, and, which also has you lying, cheating, stealing, just living a life that is so not who you are. And I remember, I was in the bathroom after breakfast. I'd probably eaten all the leftover toast on my kid's plate, and I was getting ready to take them to school. And I was in the bathroom. I was throwing up. I came out. My daughter was sitting outside the door. She'd probably heard me. And she said, Mommy, are you okay? And she was probably 7 or 8. Let's see, 36. Yeah. So I said, of course I'm okay. And there was just this, I don't know how to describe it other than it was like a flash. And there was an awareness that, oh, wow, I'm teaching my daughter to mistrust her internal guidance, just like what happened to me in the whole abuse that led to the eating disorder in the first place. And I don't know, there's just something, I think, as a mother, I've heard similar stories where that protection of your children is oftentimes stronger than the protection we have for ourselves. And there was just something that, like, that's not okay with me. And I went upstairs, I took a shower, and in the shower, I heard this voice that says, tell the truth. And the abuse in my life had been kept a secret for 20 years by that time. And then I just had this experience of getting out of the shower, the phone rang, somebody was asking me where something was. I was looking at the package sitting on my desk saying, I don't know, I put it in the mail yesterday. You should probably get it today or tomorrow, thinking, oh, I can get this over to the post office and get it to them fast enough so it'll come in tomorrow. You know, all that maneuvering, manipulating, covering up my path. And I realized, oh, I really do lie. Because it wasn't like I had the awareness I lied. It was simply a tactic of survival. And so from that day on, I just began to make telling the truth the primary focus of my life. And it changed everything. And my life did fall apart. You know, I was a military wife to a military officer who was currently deployed. I lived on a base, you know, with 3 children, and my life did fall apart. And I began to pursue kind of the healing path and alternative wisdom and alternative healing. But it ultimately led to my recovery. And then I continued to get, you know, 3 other messages. These are in the book, which tell the truth was the first one, face your fears, because usually the reason we don't tell the truth is we're afraid of something. We're afraid our life's going to fall apart. We're afraid of what other people think, you know, some future tripping event. So tell the truth, face your fear, stay in the moment. So how you don't fall into the grips of fear is you stay present, which is not where fear lives. Fear lives in the right here, the right nowness of life, loving others, letting other people love me. And that series of 4 kind of wisdoms took me through these now 36 years. I mean, I still use those as guides for my life whenever I feel confronted or afraid or like I'm not living, you know, not staying present, not living in this moment. And that's how I recovered. And so I would say that moment with my daughter where my protective device as a mother was stronger than my self-destructive advice was that moment where kind of everything changed. And I mean, ultimately I got my life back. So yeah.
You got your life back, but it also all fell apart, or what you had.
Sure.
What you this life that you had created like had fallen apart. And I think that is so profound, because that's the thing we're all so afraid of, right? Is like, well, if I do this, everything that I have around me or have created around me will shift and change and, you know, fall apart, or the balls will drop. And that's what we feel like is worst case scenario. And yet what you're saying is, that did happen. Yes, it did. And here I am. And then you were able to move into this new space that was more aligned with who you actually are. Can you talk a little bit about that, and even what you see today with young people and how that fear can so just control us, that fear that makes us tell the lie, or the fear that allows us to keep living in this space that is not at all aligned with who we are? Or can you talk a little bit about that?
So I think that's probably one of, I mean, I discovered that recently. Part of that happened during the Yellow Conference. I discovered recently, I really have a heart for the upcoming generations, and how much of our time and our energy is spent trying to prove ourselves or hold things together, or like you said, kind of keep it all working. And we've designed these lives that are big, with huge visions and huge dreams, and we're multitasking, and we're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and thinking, we're just upholding this, in a sense, a burden, but it's something that we've created, and there's elements of it that are beautiful and amazing. And it's oftentimes not supported by the deepest expression of who we are. And it's oftentimes having us battle our own internal, our own selves. Like, we're questioning, is this okay? Have I done enough? I should have done more. We're still thinking that we have to prove ourselves, or we have to get somewhere, as opposed to just relishing in how amazing, how beautiful we are, and how far we've already come. And that battle is stopping us from actually being up to what we could fully be up to. And I think, I've recently just kind of been given this heart for helping people see, like, who you are is amazing. Who you are is beautiful. You're incredible. You're gifted. You're talented, no matter how you see yourself. And that it's how you're seeing yourself that has you struggling so much to try to prove something or accomplish something, when you can just be sitting in that you are a divine creation. And from there, things will come forth and come into fruition, and you won't have to be trying so hard. Like, we're trying too hard because we're battling some internal version of a diminished sense of ourselves. And I'm not saying it's just with women, but because I'm a woman, I think I'm acutely aware of, I'm often in the presence of other women. And so, I think it's important for us to, like, imagine if you took on, there's nothing to prove and nowhere to get. What if you took that on? There's nothing to prove and there's nowhere to get. Then what would you be doing with this one precious life that you're living? For some people, I think they would be doing something very differently than what they're doing. And mostly we're caught in some level of survival instead of thriving. And how we shift from that is we oftentimes let what we're attempting to hold on to fall apart. And when it falls apart, it's like the phoenix, right? When it falls apart, you'll actually rise from the ashes, and you'll probably discover you have a different trajectory in your life, or maybe it's a similar trajectory, but it's not so burdensome. You're not carrying this load, which I think is fueled by some expression of, there's something wrong with you, there's something missing, you should be further, you should be more, you're not enough. Like, I think that's probably the biggest lie and the biggest battle that most of us face in our lives, or some attempt to outrun that, as opposed to just like, that's not who you are, I don't believe that, and spend more time actually appreciating yourself, and thus appreciating others, and being able to build something that's based on a much more stable foundation than trying to outrun or outlive the lie that there's something wrong with you or you're somehow inadequate. And I've just been recently given this kind of, it's like new eyes to see how incredible most of the people I run into are. And yet they think they're not. And I think that's some future, that's something I'm being called into. And I mean, I think, I'm looking for what's the expression of that. And I am kind of leaning towards something you shared with me, which is, I think it will be kind of small in-person groups of women. I think we do need to get away from so much technology and actually sit in circle, as women have done for eons, and we've gotten far away from that. And so I think there will be expression of that coming once we get through this transition up to Idaho or woods. And I don't know, I think there is something coming through, but yeah, I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But I think that is part of my mission, which it is my calling, that people don't miss how loved they are. Well, that's one of those expressions that, love doesn't ask you to prove yourself. Love just loves you. And I think that's part of this journey I've been on, where like never before, as I think we're going through this huge change and transition on the planet, as a culture, even as a world population. I mean, we can see it happening in Iran, in China, it's everywhere. Brazil, the US, there's an opening right now. And I think there's an amazing opportunity for the feminine to begin to express itself in us, through us, over us. And somehow I feel called to that, but I don't exactly know what that's going to look like yet. And that's part of following this wisdom, is you're following it, but it's not like you can see the end result yet. You just are continually listening and moving towards and forward, and it unfolds as you take action.
Yeah. And I think that's the scary part, is like, you don't know how it's going to unfold. And I think that is where fear can creep in as well. Do you, first off, everything that you're saying is like, wow. Just, yes. As you have gone on your journey of listening and moving forward towards that knowing, listening to it, doing what it says, when you do, or when in the past or present, when you have felt that fear creep up, the fear of the unknowing, stepping into this unknown space, the fear of not knowing how it's going to turn out, the fear of like, what if everything falls apart? Like all of these fears, really, of, I think what it comes down to is like the unknown, right? And the lack of control. I think that lack of control is really hard for us. Like, is there anything that you've done or a practice to kind of just help you realign with that message that you've received, or remind yourself of what you're doing, or what it is that why you're listening to this? Or how do you kind of like, okay, hello, fear, I'm still going to move forward?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple of things, right? So gratitude into the present moment. And obviously, because of Cafe Gratitude and that journey and the books that we've written and Sacred Commerce and all that, I'm pretty practiced in, I recognize I'm in the future yet to happen possible fear or outcome, but I'm actually here right now. And if I just keep my attention on all that I already have and am grateful for it, the fear subsides, because fear never lives in the present moment. So gratitude brings you into the present. I mean, I just had this texting conversation with my son last night, and he was saying, wow, I feel stressed. I feel like, what if I fail? What if I run out of money? Well, that's what we do. We live in this what if, but that's an indication that fears come in and kind of gotten a grip on you. And for some people, it happens when you slow down and the mind starts to go crazy. So, one thing I do is I have a practice of getting ready for bed, so that when I lay down and I'm slowing down, my mind's not running amok, and I always like take a bath and I slow down and I have a, cup of hot tea, or I have a, saffron latte. I have something to have. And then I light a candle in my room and I turn on my, what are those things called that put steam from essential oil?
Diffuser.
Those things. Diffusers, I put that on. So there's a practice so that when I lay down and I'm still, my mind's quiet, as opposed to jumping into the future, which is what fear will do. Fear will look for any opportunity to distract you. And so really the practice is, let's not get distracted. And our phones are a distraction. Like if you go straight from a computer or straight from your phone to bed, amok, because it's running at the speed of these technological devices that we know impact us. And so there's this process of slowing down. And I think that's part of it, is that we don't let ourselves feel chased by our life, but we're actually the ones that are guiding it. So slowing down is, I mean, it's a great form of rebellion in the technological age that we live in. It's a rebellious act to move slower. But slowing down, making sure that the information that you're putting in is aligned with what you're committed to putting your attention on. You know, whatever you're attending to, you are worshiping, because your attention is the most valuable thing you have. Everybody wants it. The phone wants it. The TV wants it. The billboards want it. You know, the data that's being collected by your movements on the screen, that's your attention. And it's the most valuable thing you have, which is why people pay lots and lots of money to get it. But you get to say where it goes. You can say that. You can close a computer. You can turn off a phone. You can change a channel. You can put on music. You can determine what images you let in. And that's a big part of training your mind to stay present to what matters to you, the people that you love, the role that you play in your community or in your family. You're doing the things that support and nourish who you're committed to being, as opposed to letting everything that's outside of you grab your attention and thus distract you from who you really are and what you're really up to. That's practice, you know, that's just turning off the news or whatever it is that's distracting you. And allowing yourself to say, I get to say where my attention goes, because where your attention goes, your life goes. That is what you live out. It's like the pictures of your mind become the picture of your life. And it's from the inside out, not the outside in. But lots of times this attempt to keep things in controlled is you're living from circumstances in instead of inward out. You're letting the circumstances dictate your actions as opposed to you choose them. And that actually will begin to outpicture into the quality of your life, the quality of your relationships, your health, your well-being, your mental wellness. And that's just practice. And it's like everything else. You just start, and then you just increase the times that you practice that, and you notice when your attention gets distracted. You notice it sooner, you return more quickly, you stay there longer, and you just gradually, you know, my husband's doing the horse stance, and he started at, I don't know, let's say a minute, and then he goes 5 seconds more every day, and he's up to 7 now. He stays at 7, but it was 5 seconds every day. And it's not like he's an athlete, but you know, that became something he was really into. It's like that, 5 seconds every day, navigating your attention. 10 seconds tomorrow, 15 seconds the next day, 20 seconds, like that. You just slowly, and pretty soon you're living your life from the attention that you're saying where it goes, as opposed to it being kind of jerked around through whatever distraction presents itself.
Wow. Just that idea of you guiding instead of being like reacting to these outside circumstances. Even just idea that we can actually be the ones guiding our lives from the inside out versus being controlled, really, because we have this illusion of control. And yet when we are in that space of just reactivity, we are really being controlled by our external circumstances.
Thinking that you're controlling it, but you're not.
Right.
Yeah, that's the illusion. That's the lie. Right. Like as an addict, right? As somebody dealing with an eating disorder, I remember I was like so afraid of being out of control, but my life was completely out of control. That's the lie. That's what keeps you trapped. Instead of like, that's why they say, like in AA, admit that you're an alcoholic, right? That's the first step. Admit that you are out of control. You have to start there, because you think the illusion is you're in control and you're controlling something, but the truth is you're completely out of control. And most of our lives look like that because we're not attending to our attention or what we're worshiping. We're letting it get usurped by whatever. You just watch. You're flipping through social media and all of a sudden you're down some tunnel because of what they put in front of you, right? And yeah, so I think part of the pathway will be, I think it was great wisdom from you. I think part of the path will be for all of us is to spend more time in person with people, be talking to our family, be talking to our neighborhood, be talking to our community. I think that is an important element of kind of recovering our lives, is getting back in person to person to communication. And you don't have to all agree. You can disagree, but you can stay in conversation. Whereas I think it's easy, in the social media or electronic communication, it's easy to only talk to those that agree with you because that's what you get sent, as opposed to it's good to sit in a diverse crowd with differing opinions and still have meaningful conversation. It's beneficial. It's good for us to do that.
Yeah, so beneficial. Tercy, as we wrap up our conversation, which, man, there's so many nuggets I'm like gonna be just sitting and meditating on, even just thinking about my nightly routine and taking time to slow down. It's like these simple practices, right? They're so simple and yet they feel so difficult sometimes. I think especially, we're recording this in December. I always feel pretty hectic this month. Like there's family and there's holidays and there's shopping and there's sales and there's like end of the year markers we want to hit. And like, it just feels like everyone all the time is trying to get our attention, but it feels extra heightened in December, which is also totally opposite of the natural rhythms of the season, right? Because December is like winter when everything slows down and the earth starts to slow down and the birds are hibernating and the animals are hibernating, and yet we like turn it up and it feels like just a reflection of how disconnected we are from nature, which is, I think, is partly why it's so powerful.
Well, if you think about that,
go ahead.
Yeah, if you think about that, Joanna, see, that's what as soon as we begin to slow down, it speeds up. That's what I'm saying. It's like when you go to bed, you're getting ready to slow down and the mind speeds up. It's not by, I don't think it's a mistake that happens, because there's this awareness that if you're slowing down, it's easier to distract you. Because in the quiet, in the contraction, you're just picking distraction that you put your attention on. And so, yeah, it makes total sense that when we should be hibernating, sitting around a fire, cracking nuts, telling stories with our kids, all those things, like, no, we gotta go, we gotta get busy, we gotta shop, we gotta end the year, of course. That's why it's so rebellious to slow down and to live more by the season and natural flow of life. It's important. It's super important. So yeah, great observation. And so the question you can ask yourself is, so how can I live more in the natural rhythm of life? What are some of the practices our family could take on that would have us still be appreciating the season and still functioning well inside of what we're committed to, not necessarily what the culture or the commercialism of our culture dictates. We dictate, Great question.
Tercy, if there was one bit of advice or a thought or something that you'd want to leave our listeners with, what would you what would you say to them? Someone who is resonating with what you're saying, but maybe struggling with the fear and the distractions and the reactions and all the things we've been talking about. What would you say to our listeners?
Well, I would probably say you're amazing. You're amazing. You're incredible. And yeah, slow down. I would say slow down and spend more time listening to others and speaking over others how much you appreciate them and yourself, how much you are appreciated. Appreciation is, like when a property appreciates, it raises in value. So when we appreciate others and when we let ourselves be appreciated, what happens is we're raised in value. Our awareness of our value and the value of others is increased. And I think that's particularly important. So yeah, let more love in. And how you experience more love is you be more loving. So yeah, especially at this. Yeah, and it's okay. Let things fall apart.
Yeah, there was at the retreat we did with you at Be Love Farm, with our guidance group members. It was like, I'll never forget that moment when one of the ladies said to you, well, I'm doing this. And you were like, well, what would happen if you stopped? And she was like, well, then it would all fall apart. And you were like, let it all fall apart then. And it was like, we all in the room were like shocked. We're like, what? Let it all fall apart? That's what we're trying to avoid here. But that's the answer. Like that is it. And I think you are just such a beautiful testament of what's on the other side of that, seeing you in your 70s, just, oh my gosh, like so vibrant, so energetic. Like I'm like, when we did the retreat, you're like, you got to go in the sauna and then jump in the pool, and just being just so inspired by you. And I finally did. So my husband and I, we went to Be Love, and you and Matthew went into the sauna and then jumped in the pool. We're like, you guys got to do it. And we totally chickened out, and we were like, we're too cold. But then I did it the next time I went there. But that's just kind of that's one just illustration of how you are inspiring so many people to just like jump in the cold pool. It feels so good. And yeah, it's uncomfortable and you don't want to go because it's cold, but it's like jump in. And I love too that you and Matthew in your 70s are taking this new step and like moving into this new place and starting this new adventure. And it's just so inspiring in a culture that just glorifies the 30 under 30 and the youth and just everything. The younger you are, the better in every way. And you are just such a testament to, you can still do things. You're in your 70s and you're doing it. Life isn't over. It's just beginning in a lot of ways. So I could just sing your praises for forever. But I'm so glad our listeners got to hear from you. Well,
I just want you to know how much I appreciate you. I'm always texting you, who wrote this? Who wrote that? And you go, I did. I go, oh my gosh, it's so great. It's so amazing. Like, I know you have a book in you that you're working on too. And I can't wait to read it. And just so you know, Elise created a ritual deck, which I just bought and received.
Yeah,
and
I got one too.
Totally amazing.
I haven't dove into it yet.
I love it. Oh, it's so great. I love that the three of us who were working to support one another are actually all fulfilling on and creating something in the world out of, just inspiring and supporting each other. So totally love what you're doing. Yeah. Love your family. Your children are amazing. You're an amazing mother. Yeah. So great. So great that you're a friend of mine. I'm super proud of that.
Thank you, Terces. Thank you so much for this conversation. And thanks for being with us today.
You're so welcome. I love it. I love yellow. I love being a part of it.
Thanks, Terces.